All right, so now we're just going to go through some word problems. So these can all be reduced to an is of percent statement, as long as I figure out which number goes where. So a janitor cleaned 7 rooms of a middle school. If that represents 35% of his daily workload, how many rooms does he clean in total? So his daily workload is his total number of rooms. And it says round to the nearest room. So that also says we're probably not going to get a nice number. But thank you for the warning. So I can say, since they said that represents that is referencing the 7 rooms. So 7 rooms is, because it was that represents is the verb there, so I could say is instead, 35% of, and this is our unknown, the total. So our of is the unknown. So it's 7 is the is, x is the of, 35 is the percent over 100. 7 times 100 divided by 35. That's why I like cross multiply divide. I got a lady almost completely through, like she got completely through their class, but we managed to reduce almost all of the curriculum to this kind of problem, which got her through the class finally. She also had a brain injury, so she couldn't remember what I said from one day to the next. We had to do cross multiply divide for like 2 weeks before it stuck. But it actually came out to 20 flat. And the only reason I relate that story is it's kind of like a perseverance story. Like if she could get through this, if she managed to remember cross multiply divide, you guys can get through this too. It was a different school, but she was going through this kind of course. All right. So there's our total. 7 is 35% of 20. So the janitor cleans 20 rooms. It's a word problem, so don't forget your units. Normally, Alex writes your units for you, so you don't have to think about it as much. And again, usually I don't do too many questions where I make you guys pick the units. And if I make you pick, like it's whatever units were thrown up in the problem, or I'll just tell you. Now, Flora invited their friends to a restaurant. The total bill was $180. She tipped 27. What percent of the total bill did Flora tip? Hopefully this is a good number. I do know at least 10% would be 18. 27 is definitely more than 18. Okay, so she did more than 10% at least. Cool, so yay. She's not a total bad person. Now let's see if it gets higher than that. So the total is our of. The 27 is our is, and they're asking what percent. So what percent is 27 of 180? That's how we could write this as an is of statement. What percent is 27 of 180? Or I could say what percent of 180 is 27? Like I could say the sentence either way, but the of and the is stays with the correct words. So 27 over 180 equals our unknown x, or you can write p if you prefer, over 100. So 2700 divided by 18 with a 0, 180, is 15. So 15% is not horrible. It's also not very good. But she at least remembered to tip. I've had doofus friends who literally forgot, and not like I'm a cheapskate and I'm forgetting. I mean, literally, they were that absent-minded. So this is one of those strange conversations I've actually had to have with people. Did you remember to tip? No, go back and tip. Yes, I am that mom friend. Ugh, now we got government stuff. The United States Census Bureau estimated 16.7% of persons of Hispanic or Latino origin living in USA in 2011. If the US population in 2011 was approximately 315 million, how many persons of Hispanic or Latino origin lived in USA in 2011? So the total population, that's our of, and they're asking what is 16.7% of that total. Let me type it. All right, so our is the unknown. Is over really large number equals the percent number, 16.7 over 100. All right, so I could multiply both sides by the 315 million, or just cross multiply 315 million times 16.7 divided by 100. And then it does say round to the nearest whole person. You'd be surprised how many people will forget. So 315. Oh. I will say that is the nice thing about the calculator is it puts the phone, at least puts the commas in there. That's nice. Times 16.7 divided by 100. Alrighty. 52,605,000, which, you know, we had a lot of zeros and 16.7 was a terminating decimal. It wasn't a repeating one. So we should get a fixed number. We shouldn't have to round. So that is our number. People of Hispanic or Latino. I think it's now Latinx is the proper thing. When they say origin, and I think we say descent now. Honestly, that is one of those things you ask the person you're talking to which way they want you to say it. And I mean that respectfully. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. Sometimes I struggle because I'm like, I don't know which words. Please help, I'm the dumb white chick. Not dumb, just clueless sometimes. Yes, I am not dumb. Don't call yourself dumb. Carnival cruise ships. In the last 2 years, 6 Carnival cruise ships have had electrical accidents. If this number of ships represents 25% of the Carnival Cruise Line fleet currently in operation, find the total number of cruise ships in the Carnival fleet. Now, some of y'all might be looking at this and your brain is like, I can just common sense my way to the answer. Awesome. That is totally fine. Like if you're comfy, you know, well, 25% is just 1/4 of whatever the total is. So if 6 is that 1/4, then I just multiply it by 4 and I get 24 and there's my answer. And you totally got the answer. And you have no work to show for it which is frustrating from some of your high school teachers' perspective, because then they had nothing to grade and it just looked like you pulled the answer out of nowhere. I get it. I've had students, like I told them, write me what you thought to get to the answer and I will give you credit for it because that works every time. But if we were going to use the equation, if you didn't notice that or didn't have that gut remember of 25%, or maybe you did, but you're like, I don't like trusting my gut on math. So the 6 is 25% of sum total. So there's our is of sentence. 6 is 25% of, in this case, the total fleet. Now, the sad thing is, like, it's kind of made up, but it's also true. Carnival cruise ships have had a lot of problems. All right, so is over of percent over 100. So 6 times 100 divided by 25. Better be 24. 6 times 100 divided by 25 is 24. So there are 24 ships in the fleet. I think technically they have, I don't know, something between like 60 and 80, I think. But I think the number of ships that are screwed up is much higher. All right, we'll pause it and pick it back up.